On today's video, we are going to be focusing on outline or piping consistency royal icing. We are going to be using this practice sheet, and I'm going to walk you through how to do all of these different lines and these 6 shapes. So we're going to treat these shapes as if we're adding puffy details on our cookie. Piping consistency icing is always a hot topic on my video reels or a discussion in my cookie classes because it's really tricky getting that right consistency. It needs to be thick enough so that you can maintain those details without them spreading. But it has to be thin enough so that when you're adding those puffy details, you're able to get that nice smooth finish on the cookie, because if it's too thick, you're going to have really bumpy details, and we want that nice smooth detail, but it needs enough structure to keep its form on the cookie. So we're going to discuss all of that in this video. Okay, so I have some icing here in this bowl, and I want to give you some pointers on what I look for to know that this is the right consistency that I need to detail my cookies, outline my cookies, add those puffy details without them cratering or getting holes in them as they're drying. So a couple things that I look for. There's like three general things that I look for. One, I'm looking for some fluidity in the icing. As I'm patting it, you can see as I'm patting it that there's that little bit of jiggle there. It's not so stiff that it's not jiggling. You want that little bit of a jiggle right there. Okay. The second thing that I look for is that I have soft peaks when I lift up the icing off the spatula. When I lift this spatula up, I want soft peaks to curl. See that curled peak right there? If your peaks are sticking straight up without drooping, then it's too stiff. So there's my curled peak right there. Another thing that I look for, if I shake the bowl, and it starts settling in on itself, that tells me I have enough moisture in the icing for me to add those puffy details to my cookies, and I'll be able to smooth it out. So those are 3 general things that I'm looking for. Now, this is thick enough where it's going to keep its structure. So if I separate this, it's not going to, that hole in the icing there, it's not going to run back together. So you can see that it's not as thin as a flood. So this is thicker than your typical flood. If this was flood consistency, these 2 sides would be running back together. Okay, so this is ready for me to bag. And then I'm going to show you how to cut the bag. It's going to be open really, really small, and then we're going to start on that practice sheet. Okay, I have our icing in this 10-inch tipless piping bag. We are going to cut this open so that we can start our practice sheet. So you want to cut a very small hole in your outline bag. We're going to start really small. You could always open that bag up. Now you want a small hole in the piping bag because if you're outlining your cookies, you want that outline to disappear when you add the flood. And when you're adding details on your cookie, you want them to be small and dainty and not super chunky. So let's take that bag. We have one seam, face that up towards the ceiling, and we're going to flatten that seam, and we're going to cut just a little bit right across the tip, a nice straight line. Okay, so you can see I only cut off that little bit. Okay, so let's start our practice sheet. So I'm going to start up here on the lines first. We're going to start easy, then we're going to work down, across, and finish with our shapes. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is We're going to start with the lines. You never want to touch the bag to the cookie, because if you do, you're going to have very inconsistent lines. It's going to be bumpy. You might have like some breaks. You can see how sloppy that line looks. So the key to getting a nice uniform flow of icing is you want to lift that bag up off of the cookie. So I'm going to let this bead out just a little bit. We're going to touch the paper and we're going to lift the bag just a little bit. Now I want a nice uniform line. I want about medium pressure. You want to squeeze enough that it's coming out, but not too hard that it's swirling like this, like curling in on itself. Okay, so we're going to touch that line, bring it up just a little bit, and keep your hand moving. Don't hover. When you hover and overthink it, that's when you start getting, curls or waves in your icing. Don't overthink it. I often tell people in class, it might sound intimidating to work faster, but that's actually in your benefit. Okay, so last one, we're going to tap, lift, squeeze, and then as we're coming to the end of the line, we're going to slowly descend, and we're going to tap to disconnect. Okay? So the next we have 3 different squiggles here. Now when it comes to squiggles and loop-de-loops, I like to raise the bag up a little bit higher so that I can see where that icing is flowing. It gives me an extra, the higher the bag is, it gives me that extra moment to plan where I want that icing to lay. So when you're really close, you need to make that decision quickly. By lifting it up, I can think about where I want that icing to go. So you can see I have a little bit more height, and as long as you're applying a good pressure on this bag, it's not going to break. Okay, so we're going to come down. I'm coming to the end of my squiggle. I'm coming down. I'm going to tap to detach. Now same thing here. I'm going to lift up and then allow the icing to fall into place. I always like to lean my arm or my hand against the table just for added support. Keep my hand from shaking. I'm going to come down and I'm going to touch to detach. Now these squiggles are getting bigger. So lift. And follow that line. And detach. Now for the loop-de-loops, I really like to lift up that bag. And you can see how vertical my icing is, because I have that nice pressure on the bag. I'm keeping that flow of icing, but I have control over it. It's not getting out of hand. I'm able to plan where I want that icing to fall and allowing it to just land right on those lines. Okay, touch and detach. Okay, so we're going to move up to our zigzags. This gives you good practice with changing direction in your icing. So when you have cookies that either have a lot of curves or angles like a square or a rectangle, you need to change direction on the cookie so that you could hug that outline and have a nice crisp outline. So this zigzag teaches you how to change directions smoothly. So I'm going to tap here. Now we're going to tap at each peak and valley to lock that outline in those spots. without that tap, it's going to be a very rounded zigzag. So we want a nice sharp zigzag. So I'm going to tap here, anchor that, gently tap, switch directions, tap, and we're not squeezing at the tap, and you don't have to, tap it hard, just enough to lock it in there. So we're lifting the bag off the paper, touching it just enough to anchor, lift it back up, touch, switch directions. And you don't want to stay at those peaks because then you're going to get a big, you don't want that. You don't want that big glob there. Just a gentle tap and switch. Okay. So here are our shapes. We're going to treat this as if we are doing puffy details on our cookies. So puffy details, they're always tricky in the cookie world. You need enough moisture in the icing for them to become smooth, but it needs to be thick enough so that it maintains its structure, its shape. If it's too watery, it's going to be very flat on the cookie. It's not going to have that nice rounded puff that we all look for in our cookies. And another issue is, when do you add those details? Do you add them when it's dry? Do you add it when it's crusted? And there's a very specific time that you add these details to maintain that puff. You want to add them to a well-crusted cookie, not a dry cookie. So a well-crusted cookie, I always place my cookies in front of a table fan. It quickens the crust, it locks in the shine, and it just helps me move along so that I'm not waiting for my cookies to crust. So in front of a table fan, probably a good 15 to 20 minutes. You want that top layer to be, dry enough that it could support these details without it cracking the crust or caving into your flood. It needs to be thick enough where it's stable enough. Now, you don't want to add these details on a dry cookie because the dried flood, it's already dried. There's no moisture left in it. So when you add details like this, that base flood, it's going to want that moisture. So it's going to suck that moisture out of your puff. And that's where craters come in. So don't wait until the next day to add your puffy details. By doing it on that crusted cookie, you're going to maintain those puffy details. And I'm sure you've seen videos where they do the squiggles or they're poking holes. Everybody has their own method, and I'm sure that it works fine for different cookiers, but I personally don't find it necessary. By doing it on the crusted flood, my puffy details always stay in place. So I don't ever take those extra steps. But you can do trial and error and see what works best for you. So let's start with this square. I'm going to start here. I'm going to lift up my bag. Now we're switching directions, so I want to tap this bottom corner. I want to lift, bring this over here, tap that corner, and then come back up here, tap, lift, and tap. So here's our square. Now, when you're adding these puffy details, what I like to do is really squeeze in circular motions. You can see how I'm moving the icing in a circular motion. I actually have my icing bag in the icing. This helps smooth it out. So I'm going to push this out here, and I'm going to move quick. There's not a lot of moisture, so we want to move quick so that we're getting this in before it starts drying, and then we're going to have a hard time smoothing that out. So I'm using the bag, and you can see I'm patting it just like I did in the bowl. So whatever the icing does in the bowl, that's what it's going to do on your cookie. So in the bowl, I was tapping it and it was settling in on itself. I used the bag and just do that little bit of a jiggle. I'm still moving in the circular motion, bring that down to this bottom line, filling in that space. Now, the key here is volume. You really want to build up these details by just doing one simple pass. It's not going to be enough. You need that volume for it to be able to settle in on itself. And that's where that puff comes into play. So I'm going to squeeze and fill in that bottom corner. Okay. So now that I have this completely filled, now I can take my scribe and I can shape up this square. So I'm just going to gently tap. You can see like this little peak here. I'm just gently tapping that. I'm not even really tapping the icing, just feathering that little peak there, help it settle in. And just to shape up this square just a little bit, I'm going to tap this icing and just kind of pull it out to the corner and shape up those corners so that I'm making that initial outline disappear. Okay, so there's our square, a nice puffy square. I'm going to lift this up just so you can see the amount of volume that I'm talking about here. Okay. Next, let's work on our triangle. We're going to do the same thing. We are going to tap the corner, lift up that bag, bring that down, tap the top, switch direction, bring that down, tap the bottom, bring this over, finish out the triangle. Now, once you're happy with your outline, you want to immediately go in there and flood. You don't want to give this time to dry. You want to make this disappear. So we're going to immediately go in that circular motion, bring up that volume. I'm going to use the bag and just bring that peak out, get that nice sharp peak. I'm going to follow this outline and fill it in. So you want to go back and forth with it to fill it in. You don't want to do the whole area all at once because you just don't want to give it too much time to dry, or you're going to struggle to get that nice and smooth. So it's just a game of patience, small circles, using that bag in the icing, and you can see how it's smoothing in on itself as I'm filling it in because I'm giving it that jiggle. By keeping the icing in the bag and doing that circular motion, I'm giving it that jiggle to help settle in on itself. Now I'm going to bring this down to the corner, and I'm going to pull, and we're going to shape up these corners here. I'm going to add a little bit right there just to freshen up that bottom corner. Use my scribe, a gentle jiggle, bring that out. Okay, so there's our triangle. Next, we're going to work on our circle. Circles are a little bit tricky to pipe. I like to bring up my icing pretty high so that I could really plan out where that icing is going to land. So I'm going to tap, I'm going to bring this up, and then this way I have a moment to look, plan where that's going to land on the cookie. Okay, and then as I'm completing the circle, I'm going to bring that down so that I could tap the starting point, and there's my circle. Okay, with circles, I like to start in the center. Okay, really build that up, and now we're going to just work our way out to the outer edge here. Once I make it to the outer edge, I'm going to follow that outline through to complete that circle. Now you can see that this is lacking some volume, so I'm going to go back and fill that in so it's nice and even with the rest of the circle. Take my scribe, give it a little bit of a jiggle. Let's settle out that peak there, just a little bit back and forth. You don't want to put the scribe in here and do it, because all you're doing is moving icing, and then you're still going to have that peak. So the key is to just jiggle the peak, not the icing. So by feathering that back and forth, I'm forcing it into that icing. Okay, let's do our heart. I'm a little bit backwards with hearts. Typically I work upside down, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to leave it right side up. But I am going to start in this bottom peak right here. So I'm going to touch here, I'm going to outline up, come down, touch in the center, start here, and bring it through. Okay, so let's start on the right hand side. I'm lefty, so it makes sense for me to start on the right hand side. You can start wherever you like in the shape, as long as you're starting in one corner and working your way to the other corner. Okay, so I'm going to use my scribe to shape up that heart just a little bit. Bring this in. I just want to sharpen up this bottom part here. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that extra and pull to sharpen up that heart. Okay. For this flower, we are going to do each petal individually. So what I want you to do is put a dot right in the center of that circle. That's going to be our starting and ending point for each petal. And then that circle part, that is where we would add the center flower once this is crusted. So we're going to do the petals first. So start with this dot, follow that petal up around the top, bring it down, complete that petal, and then we're going to fill it in. Bring this down, let it smooth out right there in the center. Now, if I were to do all of these next to each other, they would kind of smooth in on each other, but I like to add dimension to my details as much as I can. So we're gonna skip one petal and we're gonna do the one next to it. So bring that around, bring that in. It's kind of like a teardrop shape. So you can see that that petal is ready for the next step once we let these crust over. Okay, so fill that in, let it join there. I'm gonna skip one, I'm gonna do this one right here. I'm gonna fill that in. I like to fill in on the outside and then work my way to the inside. Now, this meeting place, it doesn't need to look pretty because we're going to add that center circle in the final step. So this meeting of the petals, we're not even going to see it in the final step. Okay, so we're going to let those crust. We'll work on our star. Now this one is going to be a little bit tricky because we have so many different points, switching of direction. So you want to start at a line. So I'm going to start right here in this nook. I'm going to lift, tap at the peak, lift, tap, lift, tap, lift, tap, all the way through to the other side. Okay, there's our star. I'm going to start at the top here. I'm going to use the bag and kind of flick that up, just pull that up a little bit to give that star that point that it needs. You can do a lot of that with the bag instead of, pausing to grab the scribe. You can do a lot of this with the bag by just pulling that icing and letting it taper out to the edge. You can see I'm taking this excess and just letting it pull and taper out. Okay. So once I have all 5 of these together, I want to add a little bit of volume to the center. Okay, then I can take my scribe, and if any of these points need some attention, I can just shape up that line. Let that settle. Okay, so there's our star. Because this is outline consistency, it doesn't have as much water in it. This is going to crust a lot quicker than a typical flood. So by just doing this star, I'm ready to move on already with this flower. Okay. So instead of outlining it, this kind of acts as my outline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here. I'm going to go in thick and bring that up and around and then build it up from there. Bring this in, let it touch that meeting point. So you can see that dimension, see that, separation of the petals. You can see those lines in there. So each petal you can see individually. Okay, bring this down, loop that up, build up that volume. Volume is key when it comes to puffy details. That's what gives it that puff. So it might look like enough, but you really want to build that up. And here's the meeting of all 3 of the second round here. So you can see each petal. You can see each petal individually here. Okay, so here is our completed practice sheet. I hope that you found this beneficial. I hope that I covered everything that you were hoping to learn. If I didn't, please shoot me an email, and we could go further into detail about what you're struggling with. I find this practice sheet very beneficial, especially for new cookiers that are not, too familiar with the different consistencies, or for those that are struggling with getting that, outline consistency, if you're having trouble with details or those puffy details here. I hope I covered everything for you. And this is a game of practice and trial and error and patience. You know, you just have to repeatedly do it until it clicks. This is going to become second nature. You're not even going to think about this eventually. You're just going to put that icing in the bowl, and you're going to be on autopilot, but you just have to practice it and to get yourself there. So the key takeaway here is the icing in the bowl. You're looking for the jiggle, you're looking for those soft curled peaks, and you're looking for that little bit of movement. If you're seeing that in your bowl, then you are spot on for that correct consistency. Just to highlight some of the things we went here, you want to lift that bag off the cookie. We don't want to touch any part of the cookie with that bag, so we want to lift and get that uniform flow, and tap to disconnect. You really want to bring up height with the squiggles and the loop-de-loops, really get that icing up high so that you could plan where that icing is going to lay. Remember that we're tapping at each peak and valley when we're switching directions. And the puffy details, this is a huge one. So you want to make sure that you're really building up the volume in your icing. Use the bag to help smooth out the icing as you're filling it. And you can use your Scribe to settle out any peaks here. And a table fan is your best friend when it comes to these puffy details. So if you have any further questions, or you have any suggestions for a future video of something that you really want me to dive deep on, shoot me an email or drop me a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.